Hello and welcome to the webinar, Navigating the CARES Act. I'm Micah Nelson with Independent Sector. For those of you who are joining us for the first time on an IS webinar, welcome. Independent Sector is a national membership organization representing a diverse set of nonprofits, foundations, and corporate giving programs working to ensure all people in the United States thrive. Today, we'll be joined by my IS colleague, Ben Kershaw, and Washington Counsel Ernst & Young's Wes Coulomb and Jessica Cameron, and Shepard Mullins, Claudia Hinch, Adam Barton, and Tamar Rosenberg. Washington Counsel Ernst & Young is a Washington, D.C. based firm that helps clients achieve their legislative and regulatory objectives. Shepard Mullins is a law firm with deep experience representing nonprofits across the country. As part of our webinar feature, all lines are currently muted, and we will pause periodically for questions. To ask a question, please type in the Q&A box or email publicpolicy@independentsector.org. That again is the Q&A box and not the chat box. This webinar will be recorded and posted on the Independent Sector website and emailed to you within 24 hours of this webinar. When you leave today's webinar, you'll be prompted to take a survey, which we encourage you to fill out to better tailor content to your needs. We look forward to your questions today and appreciate your attendance. And with that, take it away, Ben.
Thank you, Micah. We appreciate it. We are so glad to have so many of you with us today. A really outstanding turnout that is not, I think, surprising to those of us who've been working on this issue really closely, but gratifying to see, and we're glad to be with you all. As Micah noted, we do have an esteemed panel of presenters today. If there's one thing I have learned in Washington, D.C., it is that the shorter your title, the more important and the more knowledgeable you are. So as the person with by far the longest title presenting to you today, I'm going to try to be as brief as possible and make sure that you have a chance to hear from these experts and a chance to have some question and answer period as well. So before we turn to that, I would like to take a few moments to set some of the context about the moment we sit in now as it relates to the CARES Act. And we do need to begin because the CARES Act is the third bill that Congress has passed in relation to the COVID-19 crisis, with a couple other pieces of legislation. So about a month ago, Congress signed into law an $8 billion package. At the time, that was seen as a rather large response to the initial reports of the COVID outbreak. That largely attempted to fund vaccine development, public health, and preparedness efforts. Shortly thereafter, we saw Congress pass HR 6201, has been frequently referred to as the Families First Act. And that legislation contains paid leave mandates, importantly, and payroll tax credits, as well as a number of other provisions important to specific segments of the nonprofit sector. We look at this as an indication of the seriousness with which Congress was taking the nonprofit sector. Because these tax credits that were created historically, in many instances, have been created as income tax credits, which do no good to tax-exempt organizations. By structuring them as payroll tax credits, which nonprofits do pay a considerable amount of, the nonprofit sector is able to benefit from these. So that's not the focus of our conversation today, but an important reminder that as we stepped into this legislative process, the nonprofit sector was already on Congress's radar. And on the following slide, you will see what independent sector's asks were coming in to consideration of the CARES Act. Again, I think this is important context for us to look at. So independent sector joined a wide range of organizations across the sector and asking Congress to expressly provide $60 billion in emergency funding to nonprofit organizations. We asked for a robust, universal charitable deduction even if it was a temporary one. We worked throughout the process to make sure that nonprofits of all sizes would get assistance, and we worked particularly hard to eliminate a prohibition in an earlier bill on Medicaid recipient organizations from receiving funding. Independent sector also believes strongly that a healthy civil society depends on a high functioning democracy and voting. And so we push to increase funding in that package for election assistance as we come into an election year. So that's some of the legislative context about what we asked. And the nonprofit sector mobilized, as part of those asks. And again, we were proud to stand with a number of partners on that. And so on the following slide, you will see that over 200 nonprofit organizations did sign on to a wide range of asks. Again, I think we're on the next slide. There were thousands of endorsements for a bipartisan amendment that would have improved the charitable deduction that was in earlier versions of that bill. That amendment was not ultimately successful, but again, significant mobilization. And the Independent Sector Action Center in particular, where we have our best statistics and our best data, generated over 40,000 emails from nonprofit sector advocates to Congress in the brief period of time that the CARES Act was under consideration. That is many times more than the number of emails that were generated to Congress by our Action Center in all of last year. So we're gratified by this tremendous mobilization. We are going to spend the bulk of our time today talking about the CARES Act. Before we turn it over to the experts, on the next slide, I have just a few quick highlights of this legislation. I won't spell out all of these pieces. It is worth noting that each of the numbers that you see on this slide are really, really significant investments. This over $2 trillion bill is the largest relief legislation passed by Congress, in modern history. And so even some of the numbers that look smaller, like $150 billion in assistance, is a really tremendous investment. And as we get into the massive support for small businesses and large businesses, those numbers get even larger. And so the last thing that I will note, if you can see it on your slides here, is that we're going to be talking about the specifics of the CARES Act today. All of these specifics that you will see on slides, many of the things that you will hear from these esteemed presenters are available one click from the top of the Independent Sector homepage. So that web address is on the slides, but if you are on independentsector.org, it is the first thing you will see, a resource, detailed guidance about how to access and learn about these programs. The work that we are doing today, the work that we have been doing with so many of you over the previous weeks, and the work we look to do in the days and weeks to come, has, maybe traditionally in independent sector's history, been work that independent sector did with its members. Independent sector is a membership organization. Because of the urgency of this moment, independent sector has lifted the membership wall from all of its resources and our webinars like this. So for the many of you who I know by the numbers, maybe joining us for the first time today, boy, would we love to keep working with you as this crisis continues and as the recovery efforts for this continue. We would sure love it if you would take a look at our membership page and our membership department. The independent sector has a whole lot to offer for members of our community. We're really thrilled to have you here with us today. Now it is my distinct honor to turn things over for an overview of how the CARES Act programs are impacting and available to nonprofit organizations specifically. Wes Coolum and Jessica Cameron from Washington Council, Ernst & Young, will take us through assistance for nonprofit organizations. Thank you.
Great, thanks Ben for that good introduction. We're going to go through today 5 programs in the CARES Act that nonprofit organizations can avail themselves of for relief in these challenging times. 2 of them will be from the SBA. Also, there's a tax credit program in there, as well as things to the Treasury Department, additional loan funds. So I'm going to kind of kick it off and talk about the first program, the Paycheck Protection Program through the Small Business Administration. Then Jessica will go through a couple other programs as well. And happy to answer any questions, I think, at the end. Ben has it set up at the end of the program. So first is the Paycheck Protection Program. Is a new 7A loan program for the Small Business Administration. This program is open to nonprofit organizations, 501c3s, and C19s with 500 or fewer employees. The way the program works is that you have to get a loan through your local financial institution, bank, credit union, or otherwise that's certified to operate with the SBA on these loan programs. And the way that it works is you get a loan through your local financial institution, and the SBA will guarantee 100% of that loan. So reduce the risk the lender to get you the funds you need. There's also the ability to get that loan forgiven as part of this program. I'll go through that in a little more detail as well. But what amount can you apply for this loan? You need to kind of keep track of your payroll. It's really key towards payroll because the way the program works is basically keyed off the amount of payroll costs you have in your organization to one, determine how much you can get as a loan, and also how much you can get forgiven at the back end of the loan. So first off, the maximum amount of loan you can get is $10 million, or if less, 2.5 times your average monthly payroll cost looking back over the prior 12-month period. So basically kind of think about what is your payroll cost for your organization and whether this is going to be advantageous to you or not. If you have 500 employees or less, you can qualify. It does require that you have to take into account the SBA affiliation rules. And so some large national organizations that have state operations in the various states or localities will have to include them and their staff in that calculation. Payroll costs will include, for this purpose, salaries, wages, benefits, health benefits, payroll costs, state taxes, as well as payments to independent contractors. So it includes both your full-time and part-time independent contractor employees as well. But the payment for salaries and wages does not include any amounts above $100,000. So it makes more than $100,000, they can be included, but only up to $100,000 of their salary and benefit costs for purposes of a loan calculation. So kind of on the next slide, talk a bit more about the application process. So you can apply through your local financial institution, a bank or other lender that has been approved through this program with the SBA. If you want to have the loan forgiven, so there's very attractive terms here. The SBA has come out with guidance that say this would be a 2-year loan at a 0.5% interest rate on the loan amount. So obviously very favorable terms, but it even gets better in the sense that if you, once the loan is secured, if you maintain your level of employment, and that is do not lay off your workers and maintain your payroll costs, the next 8-week period, then you can have the principal amount of that loan forgiven after the 8-week period has expired. Obviously, you'll have to do documentation to show you kept your workers on the payroll and the payroll costs that you incurred. But if you use the funds from the loan to pay for your payroll costs or for costs for rent, a mortgage on your property, or for utility costs, you can have that amount forgiven as part of this program. Now, there is a reduction in that forgiven amount if, for example, your payroll costs does get reduced during the 8-week period compared to your level of employment in last year's 2019, February to June 30th of 2019, or compared to, if you want to choose, the other applicable period through January 1st to February 29th of this year. So basically, you have to compare your payroll costs for the 8-week period after you secure the loan compared to last year or first part of this year to see if you've maintained your level of employment. If not, you have to reduce the amount of loan that would be forgiven under the SBA program. So that is kind of the basics of that. This is from the standpoint of a nonprofit organization. If you have 500 employees or less, if you're a 501c3 or C19, this is very attractive to you to get that funds very quickly. You can apply for the loan as early as tomorrow. Banks are starting to get up to speed on this program. There's still some guidance needs to come out from the SBA and the Treasury Department, but it is going to get ramped up very quickly. And there's also, I think, a sense that this will be a lot of people apply for this program, and so it'll be to your advantage to get your documentation together, get the application process together, which is already up on the SBA's website, and get in conversation with your financial institution to see if you qualify for this loan program. So with that, I'll turn over to Jessica to talk about the other SBA program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program.
Thanks, Wes. So like Wes mentioned, there's a second type of loan program available through the SBA, and that's called the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. Now, these types of loans, or I'll call them EIDL for right now, are not new, and they've been around for quite some time. However, the CARES Act expanded these loans and provided some new stipulations related to what's going on with the coronavirus. So one thing that's new to know about is that for applicants who apply, within 3 days of application, they will receive a $10,000 advance on their loan. And I should also mention that we're still in the small nonprofit space. So we're looking at nonprofits that have 500 employees or less still. So if you apply within 30 days, you'll be eligible for a $10,000 advance. And even if the application for the loan is later denied, you still get to keep that $10,000 advance payment. The idea being that the government is trying to get out liquidity, get out cash to organizations that are really hurting during these times. One thing I should note, though, is that if you do keep that $10,000 advance payment, it can affect your ability to, can affect the number of your loan forgiveness under the SBA loans that Wes talked about. So there are kind of some interweaving requirements that are important to look out for. The next slide just goes through a little bit about how to apply for the loans and some additional relief, additional information. We do expect more information coming out of the SBA soon, so watch out for that going forward. But on that note, I'll leave it to Wes to talk a little bit about some of the retention credits available.
Great, thanks, Jessica. So the other program that is available is an employee retention tax credit. There is no employee size limit for this program, and it's available to any employer that has a payroll and pays employment taxes on your workers' salaries and benefits. So much more open-ended than the SBA program. And the way the tax credit would work is basically it's a 50% credit based on the first $10,000 of wages you pay to your employee up to obviously $5,000 total. Credit is refundable per employee. And that credit is against your Social Security 6.2% employment taxes that you pay for and you file for on your Form 941 with the IRS. And so be able to, in a sense, look at your quarterly estimated payments, your quarterly filings for your payroll taxes, and get a credit against those filings and those taxes you pay. And you could even file for an advance of that credit through Form 7200 and get some of the funds back very quickly, or basically retain those funds, not have to deposit them to the IRS and give them back to the IRS very quickly. So the way that this program works is you be eligible, you have to have been shut down partially or fully from a government order due to the coronavirus during the time period of March 12th through January 1st of next year, basically to the end of this calendar year. If you were not shut down through a government order, then you can do a secondary test based on whether your gross receipts have been reduced by a few percent over this period compared to last period. And it would mostly apply to for-profit businesses, not necessarily to the nonprofit organizations. Mostly look to the fact that your operation was shut down partially or fully due to a government order. And if basically the way the credit works is it intended to incentivize you as an employer to retain your employees on your books and pay them even though they don't come to work or can't come to work. And so they're not doing work for you, but they are being paid anyway. So basically, it's as it says, employee retention credit based on the amount you pay your employees, even though they're not able to come to work or doing work for you. The IRS has come out with some additional guidance, questions and answers on this recently. We do expect some more guidance to come out on the details of this program. One thing that is important to note is that if you get a loan through the SBA 7A Paycheck program, you cannot also be eligible for the employee retention tax credit. So it's really an either or test. So if you're a large employer, the employee retention tax credit is more obviously more for you. If you're a small 500 employees or less organization, you kind of look at the comparison between the two programs and find out which one would be more economically advantageous for you as an organization to take advantage of. You cannot do both. So Jessica's now talked about, I think, the next program on the list.
Thanks, Wes. So one of the other kind of provisions that's available for nonprofits is the deferral of payroll taxes. So this applies to all nonprofits. There's no kind of number of employees that the nonprofit has to have or be under. And essentially, employers can defer their payroll taxes or their the employer share of their payroll taxes for employees until the end of this year. There's no number also on the number of employees that that this qualifies for. One thing I should note though is that if you use a Paycheck Protection Program loan and you have you also then have that loan forgiven, you're not able to defer your payroll taxes as well. So this is something I want to just really quickly point out. Wes mentioned this as well. So for the credit, it's an either or. If you take advantage of the employee retention credit, it's an either or as far as taking the Paycheck Protection loan and also taking the credit. You have to pick one or the other. The deferral of payroll taxes is somewhat different in that you can still take the Paycheck Protection loan. You just can't have it also then be forgiven in addition to taking the deferral of payroll taxes. So that's something to kind of to point out. I should note also that the IS website has a great tool that kind of summarizes this information and notes this as well in the section. So something to keep a lookout for.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Appreciate that summary. So the kind of last and fifth and final program we wanted to kind of talk about that's available to nonprofits is really geared towards larger organizations. So if you fall outside of the 500 or less employee category, you can take advantage of a treasury program called the Economic Stabilization Fund that is providing direct or guaranteed loans through the SBA or through the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve for larger employers. And there's about $450 billion available in this fund. A broad range of industries, nonprofits, and others take advantage of this program as well. And these would be either direct or guaranteed loans. There's no calculation on the size of amount loan you would qualify for or get, but they would have a 6-month deferral for payments, as well as a capped interest rate of 2% as you apply for the loan. Now, the way that you'd also have to qualify for the loan, you'd have to show a good faith estimate and certification that the economic conditions make the loan necessary. Basically show that you've been damaged or economically disadvantaged because of the current economic environment. to your organization as part of the qualification for this loan. That was not part of the SBA 7A loan program, or it is part of this program as well. Loan proceeds, you need to also certify that you're going to use loan proceeds in this loan program for retaining 90% of your workforce at full compensation through September 30th of this year. So the intent of this program as well is to help encourage employers to maintain their employment levels at least at 90% rate through September 30th of this year. So this is able to larger organizations, 500 or more, with the intent to keep them on the books. If, for example, you have a reduction in force reduce on your employer's employment, then you can actually restore back up to 90% level if you do that within 4 months after the public health emergency is over. So you can restore that by the end of September of this year as well. So there's an ability to kind of help cure your reduction in your employment, to qualify for the 90% threshold under this fund. As I said, this is still ongoing. Guidance is still coming out from Treasury on this program, and as we get more details, we can provide that to you through this website. That's kind of the basics that we have for those 5 programs. So a lot of options available to your organization. I think what people need to think about is what kind of fits your needs, what can you qualify for. Get your documentation together based on your payroll, employment levels, and figure out what program might work for you on a going forward basis if you have a need for such assistance in this environment. With that, Ben, turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Wes and Jessica. Before we pivot to some of the individual provisions, I wanted to pause for just a moment to answer all of the questions that have come in thus far. It's only a few hundred, so I hope you all brought your sleeping bags. Instead, let me just ask one question that has been a recurring theme for a number of folks, and we will come back. We have dedicated time reserved for a lot of Q&A at the end. But one question to flag right now is if you could talk a little bit more about what counts and what doesn't when calculating average payroll costs, benefits, health benefits, retirement payments. Do 1099 contracting payments count? What's used to calculate average payroll cost?
Good question, Ben. So the purpose of the SBA 7A loan program, payroll costs would include salaries, wages, sick leave, health benefits, pension benefits, state income taxes on your employees, as well as payments to independent contractors. So those payments would basically include the payment you pay to them as compensation for their services, up to a maximum of $100,000 overall in wages as benefits. So if someone was paid more than $100,000, you basically just limit to a cap $1,000 for purpose of that one employee's average wage. And the calculation for the initial loan would be the average wage on a monthly basis the past 12-month period. Then for the loan forgiveness piece, you take the same payroll costs you have in that category and look at that over the 8-week period after you've incurred the loan to add up how much you paid out in payroll costs for that 8-week period to see how much the loan will be forgiven.
Great, thank you very much. And so we will come back to more questions about these programs. I now want to turn to our colleague and friend Claudia Hinch from Shepherd Mullen to walk us through some of the key provisions in this very large, very impactful bill impacting individuals. Thanks, Claudia.
Thanks, Ben. So I am going to talk about what the CARES Act provides for individuals in terms of assistance. The temporary expansion for unemployment benefits under the CARES Act is like a three-legged stool. There are 3 parts to it. First, there is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, or the PUA. This provides emergency unemployment assistance to workers who are normally left out of the regular unemployment insurance benefits. it covers an individual who is not otherwise eligible for regular unemployment compensation or has otherwise exhausted their state unemployment compensation to the extent it was less than 39 weeks. So long as that individual provides self-certification that they are unemployed or partially unemployed due to COVID-19. So this might include not being able to go to work because of a stay-at-home order, your place of employment closed, you're caring for a family member who has coronavirus or is showing symptoms of coronavirus and is awaiting a medical diagnosis, or caring for a child who is at home because the school's closed due to COVID-19. The PUA also expands eligibility for unemployment to self-employed individuals, part-time workers, and those with a limited work history. But it does specifically exclude people who are able to telework with pay, those who are receiving paid sick leave or other kinds of paid leave benefits, and people who are not authorized to work in the United States are not eligible for these benefits. So what is the benefit? The PUA provides a weekly benefit in an amount equal to what's authorized under the state unemployment laws. And for self-employed individuals or gig employees, there's a floor that it'll be no less than 50% of the state's average weekly unemployment insurance benefit. And you will get that weekly benefit for up to 39 weeks. And as I mentioned, that 39 weeks includes weeks that you were paid by regular state unemployment. The second stool is the Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, or PUC. This is the $600 weekly payment in addition to the state unemployment benefit. And that is available to individuals for up to 4 months, so through July 2020. This $600 benefit may be paid at the same time as regular state unemployment benefits or may be paid separately, but in either case, it will be paid weekly. The third expansion is the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, or PEUC. This provides funding for the states to extend their regular unemployment by 13 weeks. So most states have 26 weeks of unemployment. If you add the 13 weeks, it would get you to 39 weeks. So for people who are getting regular unemployment for the 26 weeks plus the extended 13 weeks, then they would have exhausted what would be available under the PUA. But if one of the few states that offers less than 26 weeks plus the 13 weeks wouldn't get you to 39 weeks, you could fill that gap up to 39 weeks under the PUA. So the federal government is coordinating with the states to get this funding to the states. So everything will run through the state unemployment office. In order for the states to receive funds, they need to show that they have processing and notification procedures in place to be able to process the applications and to notify individuals of their benefits and what the state guidance is that's out there relating to these benefits, including the extended unemployment benefits due to COVID-19. So moving on to the next slide, this slide has some additional funding for unemployment benefits under the CARES Act. This includes the federal government will fund for those states that waive the 1 week waiting period for unemployment so that your unemployment benefits can start right away. And there's also funding for a new short-term compensation plan. So there, the federal government will temporarily fund for states that have work share programs. A work share program allows an employer to enter into an agreement with the state unemployment office and provide prorated unemployment benefits for individuals whose hours have been reduced, which in turn results in less layoffs and just reduction in hours with some partial unemployment to make people whole. Finally, nonprofits that have elected to self-insure unemployment rather than paying state unemployment taxes, the federal government will fund 50% of the amount of benefits paid to employees for these self-insured nonprofits. So normally a nonprofit that's self-insuring unemployment would have to reimburse the state 100% of the unemployment compensation that's paid to its employees. Now, for the period between March 13th, 2020 and the end of the year, December 31, 2020, the nonprofits will only need to reimburse the state 50% of the unemployment costs, and the federal government through a unemployment trust fund with the state will fund the other 50%. Individual unemployment claims, as I mentioned, have to be filed with the state where the individual works. Individuals should file online as soon as possible. You have to be patient. They are really inundated with calls, and I think the websites are having trouble with the amount of people that are trying to apply online. But it is worth checking and making sure that your state is ready to start processing these applications. I know a few days ago, Massachusetts had indicated that people should wait to file because I think they're gonna have a separate system for those filing for these expanded benefits than just regular state benefits. So it's worth just checking the website if you can get on and make sure the state is ready to kind of process those applications. So moving to the next slide, we're gonna switch topics and talk about some incentives that the CARE Act provides for charitable giving. First, it permits individuals who do not itemize their deductions, so people that just are taking a standard deduction. And normally, if you have a standard deduction, you cannot take a charitable contribution tax deduction from your personal income taxes. Now, those individuals will be able to deduct up to $300 of cash contributions that are made to most charities. Private foundations and donor advised funds are not eligible for a deduction. This deduction, the $300 for the people with standard deductions, is available only for the 2020 tax year. No application is required. The deduction would just be claimed on your tax return for 2020. The CARES Act also lifts an existing cap on individuals who itemize their deductions, and it's raising the 60, so the cap was originally 60% of adjusted gross income, and that has been increased to 100% of adjusted gross income. So this can be significant for some donors. So charities may want to alert potential donors of this benefit and encourage them to keep their receipts in order to substantiate the deduction. Finally, for corporations, the bill raises the annual limit from 10% to 25%, and food donations from corporations would be available up to a 25% cap. So that's increased from the 15% cap. Moving on to the next slide, another benefit for individuals is some student loan assistance. The CARES Act allows employers to pay directly to a lender or to reimburse an employee for student loans. And this is being incorporated into education assistance programs that employers might already have. So the cap for all education assistance is $5,250 a year. You could put it all into a student loan repayment or reimbursement, or it might be split between reimbursements for books or tuition that they're currently, for classes currently taking, and then some could be applied to repayment of a student loan. So this exclusion applies to student loan repayments made after March 27th, 2020, and before January 1st, 2021. So this benefit just wouldn't be included in the W-2 as wages, and the employee wouldn't have to pay tax on that benefit. Employers may want to review their education assistance policy and applications if they choose to provide student loan repayment as a benefit. The CARES Act also includes some other provisions relating to student loans, including an interest-free suspension of payments due on certain federal loans until September 30th, 2020. The payment suspension will not affect public service loan forgiveness loans, because the CARES Act specifically says that for each month that the loan is suspended, the individual is treated as having made that payment for purposes of the public service loan forgiveness program. If an individual is able to make the payment, though, either because the individual is being reimbursed by the employer or the employer is paying it on behalf of the employee, it might be a good time to make the payment because you're not accruing interest during that period, so you can kind of pay down a bigger piece of the principal during that time. So now moving on to the last slide. This slide is focused on the rebates for individuals. So each US resident or citizen can receive up to $1,200 and an additional $500 per child if they qualify. The amount of the rebate is reduced for higher income taxpayers. So as noted on the slide, the phase out begins after $75,000 in adjusted gross income for a single taxpayer, $112,500 for a head of household filer, and $150,000 for married couples who filed jointly. The amount is completely phased out at $99,000 for single taxpayers, $146,500 for head of household filers with one child, and $198,000 for joint filers. Individuals must have a work-eligible Social Security number and must not be a dependent of another taxpayer. So in my case, my college-age son who thought he was getting a rebate is not, since he's still a dependent. For most individuals, no action is required, since the IRS will use the taxpayer's 2019 tax return, or if it hasn't been filed yet, their 2018 return. Individuals with little or no income may need to, they're still eligible, but they may need to file a simple tax return in order to receive the stimulus payment. Although the IRS has clarified that Social Security beneficiaries will not need to file this simplified tax return, they'll just automatically receive their rebate. So that is the end of the formal presentation. So I think I'll turn it back over to Ben.
Great. Thank you very much, Claudia. And thank you all for tremendous questions. Again, I don't know that we're going to get to all 500 of them in the next 17 minutes. We've been culling them and trying to highlight the ones that are most important. So as we turn to some more dedicated Q&A time, I will note that this time next week, we will be having a more policy-focused webinar about what is next for COVID-19 relief for nonprofits. This is, we're here today to talk about the CARES Act. We have conversations ongoing with sector partners about what's next legislatively, and we look forward to talking with hopefully all of you next week about that. the information that you've all heard, I should have noted at the beginning, is informational in purpose and for educational purposes. Obviously, the most important people to be getting guidance from are individual financial institutions and from your own advisory relationships. Comments and particular guidance, specifically as we get into Q&A today, please, they should not be taken as business or tax advice, formally so. The first question that a number of people have asked, yes, the slides will be posted. Yes, you will all get emailed a recording of this. And for questions that we have not gotten to so far and will not get to, there is a lot more detail on the very top of the independentsector.org homepage. And so I want to turn to some questions. The first question that has come up a number of times, I think, is for Claudia, specifically with regards to who may apply for a number of these unemployment insurance programs, right? So there have been expansions of eligibility for many folks who may not traditionally have had access to unemployment insurance compensation. We've had questions about sole proprietors, part-time employees, gig employees. Can you spell out those particulars in even more detail for us?
Yeah, so if you're self-employed, so you could be, a photographer who's often doing weddings, or, you work on your own and work as an independent contractor, or just a self-employed individual, or a part-time individual would be eligible. Really, anyone who's unable to work due to COVID-19 is eligible, except if you're able to telework and get paid, or if you're not authorized to work. So if you don't have a work permit, you will not be eligible to apply. The other group that's picked up that often isn't eligible for unemployment is if you don't have sufficient work history. So that is, people with limited work history can also apply for benefits.
Great, thank you. So this is a question that we've had a few folks ask about over the prior days and in the Q&A function. There's a portion of the eligibility section on the SBA site about being in the business of lobbying and ineligibility based on that. It is, independent sector works very hard to get nonprofit organizations to advocate and to lobby, which if you're a public charity, you are allowed to do. Are people who are registered, have a registered federal lobbyist or spend dollars on lobbying, are they disallowed from applying for SBA programs? Jessica or Adam?
Yeah.
Wes?
It does say it in there, but they would be applicable to all organizations, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit business. I think it means that you're in the business of lobbying, so it would mean that is what you do as an organization, rather than what is activity that you do on occasion as part of your business activity. If your main mission is something else, it means that anybody who has any sort of lobbying expense would be included. Now, if there's costs that I haven't seen this in detail, but if there's costs that would include anyway for costs for lobby expenses for business or nonprofit, if you do pay for them, that would be excluded from the calculation. I would think, but I don't think exclude any organization that has any sort of lobbying activity unless it's your primary, main function, your main purpose of your organization.
Right. In which case, you're not a 501c3 charity at that point.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Adam, was there anything you were going to add on that?
No, I think that's exactly right. You know, if you qualify under 501(c), you know, you're eligible for the loan. So.
Great. Okay. We've also, also in eligibility, a number of folks have asked about, organizational eligibility for religious institutions, as well as for, municipalities or sub-governmental entities. Can someone tell us a little bit more about our religious institutions? Can they apply? And can municipalities or government entities apply for SBA loans through EIDLs or the Paycheck Protection Program?
So for the Paycheck Protection Program, it's applied to 501(c)(3)s and C19s only.
And C19s are veterans organizations, is that right?
Correct, correct. So those two categories, if you fall in that category, then you would be eligible for that program. For the IDL program, it's for private nonprofits. So that would not include any sort of government agency or organization related to a government. It needs to be a private organization. Got it. Okay, thank you.
So this is a question that I would like to turn to Adam on. We've seen a lot of I think the SBA is learning with all of us about the intersection between the nonprofit sector and SBA programs. And so specifically, in completing the form for the Paycheck Protection Program, there's a question about applicant ownership that I think is confusing for a lot of us in the nonprofit space. Can you talk about how a nonprofit organization should approach that question and answer that question?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one that's been asked and that a lot of folks in our office as well. In fact, just this morning, emailing back and forth about somewhat of the inconsistency in that for nonprofits, but also it's not entirely clear for small businesses why that's needed. So I guess the short answer is there are affiliation rules that will apply to nonprofits similar to a small business. And maybe that's what they're getting at. And maybe when you go to apply for the lender, they're going to ask about entities that would otherwise qualify as part of the affiliation rules. But as far as, ownership, you're right. There, for most organizations, there is no owner. For most nonprofits, there is not a traditional ownership structure.
Great, thank you. The next question that I want to turn to is about the employee retention credit and about the deferral of payroll taxes. How, we've all been combing through the SBA website for application details. How do nonprofit organizations apply for or claim these, either the credit or how do they make the deferral? Jessica, do you want to take that one?
I know that for at least additional guidance on the deferral of payroll taxes and on their retention credit, we should be getting additional information soon from Treasury and other agencies. I don't know if Wes has any additional information on kind of how that interplay works together.
Sure, Ben. So to file your employment tax, you have to file Form 941 on a quarterly basis. And so you would apply for that credit through employment taxes and through the IRS as an offset against your employment tax you have to pay on a quarterly basis.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I'm seeing a number of folks following up on Adam's answer about applicant ownership, and I think what I'm hearing Adam say is that this is something that it sounds like the SBA and financial institutions are still working out, and so I would encourage people to take a look at the tool on the independent sector homepage as we get further guidance about what those mean. The other area where we have a lot of questions is about the interplay between applying for these various programs. And I know that cuts a number of different ways. The first question I would ask is about self-employed individuals, right? And so we heard Claudia talk about how they are now eligible to apply for some of the unemployment insurance programs. Self-employed individuals are also eligible for the SBA programs that we've talked about. Can people apply for both if they're self-employed or a sole proprietor?
Well, I'll take it first, and maybe Adam or Claudia have another comment. The unemployment insurance is for being laid off or not working, right? So your business is shut down, you can apply for it in that context. Where as the SBA loan program is for you to apply and continue to maintain your employment or your work based on retaining your employees or retain your employment at cross purposes, though, that standpoint.
Okay. Others want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one alone would be to keep your business going and to stay afloat as a business, so you wouldn't be unemployed. Whereas unemployment insurance is because you no longer can continue your business.
That crystallizes it. Thank you, Claudia. And then can we talk a little bit more about the intersection between Paycheck Protection Program and EIDL application? Can folks apply for both? And can we recap how the interplay between those two programs will work, specifically with the $10,000 advance?
Sure. So you can apply to both. The key that is important to note is that if you are given the $10,000 advance for the EIDL loan, remember those are the disaster loans, that could count towards the amount that you are allowed to forgive or be forgiven for the Paycheck Protection Program loans. Remember that the Paycheck Protection Program loans, that part of that can be forgiven if they're used for certain types of expenses that Wes outlined a little bit earlier.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. So we've also had a number of questions about the $300 deduction, about whether that is per donation, a maximum of $300, or a per tax return maximum. And want to be very clear that one of the reasons that independent sector believes that threshold is far low is because that is a per return limitation, meaning that for people who do not itemize, donations above that threshold are not deductible. We've also had a number of questions about about $300 and is there a $600 for married filing jointly. That is not in the text. And maybe folks can correct me on this. It is my supposition that perhaps people, if you're married filing separately, you could each claim the $300 deduction. Is that what we're thinking? Or are we still?
I think it's a per, so if you're married filing separately and you each get the standard deduction, you would each probably get to apply a $300 deduction. But if you're filing jointly, you would only get the $300 to apply towards your standard deduction. Right. And then anybody who itemizes then gets the 100%, which could be way more than 300. So the 300 deduction is a per taxpayer deduction that previously was zero. So right. But if you're itemizing, it could be more than 300.
Got it. Yeah, so we have the return of the marriage penalty. We don't hear about marriage penalty as often in tax policy circles as we used to. So at least we get some new talking points out of this. Where is the last question that I thought we should be sure to take today? Oh, so we've had a number of people asking again on the SBA program about the 500 employee limit and who counts towards being an employee. Do part-time employees count? Do independent contractors count? Do employees based abroad count? Can one of you walk us through who counts as an employee for determining that 500 employee eligibility threshold?
Sure, Ben, I can jump in here.
Thanks.
So, and I think this will help clear up a little bit one of the prior questions about ownership and control, which I'll get to. But so first, what the Act provides is that the employee count is all full-time, part-time, and those employed on other bases. So it's quite expansive in looking at what they're counting towards the 500. So I think that's what you have to look at. I think, independent contractors certainly may be considered if they are deemed employees under certain state laws, and certainly part-time employees and of course full-time employees as well. There are, however, certain exceptions to that 500 employee qualification criteria. And those are certain businesses that have an NAICS code, North American Classification Industry Standard. I don't know if I said that in the right order, but I believe nonprofits may have these in certain cases as well. And if they fall under the industry code category 72, which applies to accommodation and food services sectors, then they can look at a per location basis instead of an aggregate basis of the whole company, which is generally what you really need to look at. Excuse me, company, I'm saying nonprofit, the whole organization, which is what you generally would need to look at. So just to get back to the sort of ownership and affiliation question that was presented. While nonprofits don't have traditional ownership, they may be considered affiliated or controlled by other organizations. Now, there's a statute that dictates and provides what that control constitutes for purposes of determining SBA eligibility, and we can, certainly point people to resources that'll go through that. But if they had substantial voting control or some other way to dictate the organization, they could be considered as part of that organization, which you would then have to count their employees towards that 500 maximum.
Excellent, thank you. So we are a couple minutes past the hour. Let me just give our esteemed panelists a moment. Is there anything that Adam, Claudia, Wes, Jessica, that you wanted to be sure to add that we haven't gotten to today? Anything on the tip of your tongue? Okay.
Not at the moment, no.
Good. So again, I want to thank, first and foremost, our panelists and everyone who joined us today. Nearly 1,000 of you still with us after 3 o'clock. We really, really appreciate your partnership and your interest in this work, and we take increased seriousness of purpose going forward from your participation and partnership today. For those of you whose questions we did not get to answer, I want to emphasize that the brains that are on this webinar right now are some of the very same brains that have helped us craft and are helping us refine the resources on the independent sector website. So we really would encourage folks to go there. And as we learn more, we will continue to push it out actively to you all and to post it on that resource page. Again, thank you all very much for your work during these uncertain and unsettling times. We are so proud to be standing with all of you, and we look forward to catching up with you again soon. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.